Okay, so for everybody who is now also listening, this is the group of today. Yeah, let me start the presentation. I will share my screen. Let's see. Can you see my presentation now? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm a bit of a split person, I must confess. So I was born in a very rational family. My father was a chemistry engineer, a chemical analyst. My sister is really a beta wizard, and she's married to a professor in botany. And I was not so very beta at that time. So I did economics and languages. I was always interested in cultures, and I have done international business, and I just started working at 21. And after that, I just learned on the flow. So I started my career in chemistry. Afterwards, I came to work in physics and engineering and ecology. So my last regular job was, I did a lot in logistics, so I know a lot about flows. I was a business unit manager of not only a transport company, but a removals company. And then you really have to understand about flows of materials and stuff like that. So that helps me now in my flow thinking. But then in my last regular job, I was an international marketing manager and a writer about vacuums, plasmas, and machine building. So it was really about physical vapor deposition. And that is a very technical term for very small layers of atoms. So I talk always a lot to scientists because I interview them. So I write then about it in popular science, or I try to make complex things easy. And that's maybe what I mostly do and try to do. And then in 2011, I woke up one day and I thought I need to be in sustainability, and I didn't know why, but okay, I came very quickly to holistic sustainability. And I went into ecosystem restoration. I did permaculture, I taught myself composting, and I thought, this is it. This is really what we need. We need to have the soil biology again. And so I did a lot in that, in the microbes and in the waters and the water flows and things like that. And my latest project now, I also started in 2013. I came to work with Günter Pauli. I don't know if anybody knows him, but he wrote the book Blue Economy. And he is just like Janine Benyus. And a lot of these people in the 70s, they all grouped together in the Club of Rome. And the Club of Rome is really an environmental platform of very influential people about complexity, about economy, about society, about environmental issues. So Günter was one of the people there, and I worked a lot with him on islands, for instance, island economies. And well, for me, complexity is really simple if you know where to start. Because if you start with one problem, you will seed more problems. If you start, for instance, to sell land to a company that needs foreign workers, then you see more problems, because you need to have houses for those people. And if you then have a building that is only causing drought because it's just concrete, or you make asphalt and everything, then you cause more problems. You cause more drought, you cause more heat stress, because the cities are heat stressed. So it is really not solve one problem, but make a scope. And Günter taught me that very clearly. Make a scope, just draw a line on an area, look what's inside, and then start to create extra value. And that's kind of the simple way I'm doing it now. So I redesign harbors like that, and areas and islands and cities and whatever. My latest project is Web3. So I was drawn last year in Greece to the Alliance of IoT and Edge Computing, Tom de Blok, and he's the chairman of that. He's also Belgian. I don't know why I have so many Belgians around me, but I really like it. When I was born, I was in Belgium, so I am Dutch, but it's a bit of a Dutch-Belgian connection, I think. So we now do a project on water and seas and satellite imaging for nature-based solutions in oceans and coastal areas. I'm mostly in coastal areas because there you have more complexity, because you have water and land and sea and fresh water and everything there. But during my ecosystem restoration time, I also came to Schumacher College, and I worked a lot with resonance. And it sounds maybe like magic, but it's not. It's like we do the same, we make a scope and we start balancing systems. And it works with resonance. It even works from a distance. And the results are amazing, really amazing. We just don't know how it works in science. So it's called pseudoscience. So I work in lots of different cultures. I like languages, I like cultures. So I work with shamans. And in Holland, I trained with Hans Anderweg and Rijk Bols. And Hans Anderweg also wrote several books about resonance and about how it works with the old math. Let me put it like that. So I always do full spectrum science because I think everybody should be curious. And I'm very curious. And along the way, I found out that science is doing some things really strange and really different than nature. And that's where the development potential is, because I'm always looking for development potential. So what do we do with resonance in the pseudoscience? We use sacred geometry, and that's the Vedic math. There is a person, also a mathematician, who gives lots of lectures about it. He's from Lebanon. Jane 108. He's also giving very interesting content on Instagram and on Facebook and everywhere. It's made by his granddaughter, I think. And he's in the group Born Global, where it's a biomimicry group from Lebanon with the it's the American University in Lebanon. And they work in Maine, in America, and in Lebanon, and also in South Africa, and in, I don't know, Egypt, Costa Rica. There are several places, several biomes where they work. It's a really great group. We have about 150 mentors and a lot of students, and it's all about biomimicry, and it all uses a lot of archetypes, and it uses the work of Janine Benyus, of course, the biomimicry way of looking at science, the principles of science, of how nature does science. And yeah, well, that's where also this is coming in. So what we do is we use geometry, because geometry has symbolism as well. And all these forms are combined together, as you can see. You have triangles, and there are different forms than rounds, so you just have to put them together. And that's what we do with Vedic math. In our, let me call it Vedic world, because it is from 5,000 years ago, and in India it's rather normal. They even have a minister of Ayurveda, so it's not like it's maybe not normal in Western science, but like in Chinese science and a lot of the Japanese science And also in the Ayurveda, it's kind of normal to think different, to look different at ways of how it works in nature. So what we always say there is water is, of course, consists of flows and microbes and everything, and it's also a recorder. So water has many phases. We know that also in Western science. There is, for instance, in America, there is the 4th phase of water, and they make energy out of that. And it is a crystalline kind of water. So H2O is not always the same. You also have things like water tension. And water tension, for instance, is what the insects walk on. So when you see them on a pond, you can see how they walk on water, and that's the water tension between the air and the water. And we always forget that there's air, of course, is also something. So, well, the chemists use it. They, like if you look at washing detergent companies who make that, they make water wetter. Sounds strange, but they want to go deeper into the fibers, the fabrics, and they make water wetter by the chemistry. And then, of course, it has a very adverse effect because now we have very polluted waters, and that also means it goes through skins. So the skins of the fish and the frogs, and they get ill by making the water wetter. So that's what chemistry does. They always find something that they like for a product, and then they don't think about the environment. And I always do it the other way around. I always think first about the environment. So that's also why in systems thinking, living system thinking, we make a scope, and we always start at the environment, and then we look at how we can flourish in that environment by creating value, multiple values. We always combine multiple values. So what means a recorder? Well, there is in, again, pseudoscience, but at this moment in the social sciences, it is really big. They're really looking at it, and it's the morphogenetic fields. Because the morphogenetic fields are, for instance, they think there is a kind of a big consciousness field where the memory of the planet is. And that sounds a bit strange because then you come into consciousness things. But in biology, it was really clear. In England, before the World War II, there were birds, and they taught themselves, humans observed that they taught themselves how to open the milk bottles. You had the milk bottles, and they were standing at the front of the house, and then they opened them, the little metal caps, they put them off, and then they could drink the milk. And then, of course, in World War II, there was no milk, and for a long time there was no milk. And then after years and years, the milk came again, and then immediately the birds, they could not have been the same birds, but they knew how to open the milk bottles. And then someone thought, and his name is, I have him on my next sheet, Rupert Sheldrake, and he has done a lot of work on morphogenetic fields. So how the memory of the planet might work. Well, in the ecosystem restoration, we work a lot between, if we do ecosystem restoration with this pseudoscience, we always work with, well, Anneke said it already, the quantum physics of it, the observer. I know in the scientific quantum physics, it's really not an issue. They look at it differently, but I can explain that later. But there have been a lot of things about the observer and about there are these tests with this, there is a split, and then they have found out that particles are not only particles, but they can be particles and waves at the same time. Well, that's the big thing about quantum physics. But what we always do, if we restore ecosystems, we always use the human connection to it. So we use our own brain waves, and that's certain hertzes. So we use the 432 hertz, we use the 528, we use the 8 to 12 hertz, which is the focus one in your brain. It's the alpha waves of your consciousness, or your lower beta waves. And the 432 and the 528 are, of course, also done by sounding forks. It's not that we always are going to meditate and really, it's not so non-scientific. It's really about waves, and it's about, it's about informators and transformators. So there are some names on these sheets. I will send them to you afterwards, so you can look some things up if you say, well, I've never heard of that before. But at this moment, there's, of course, Emoto was there. He did a lot of work on water. And when we train this, we always also work with like cooked rice. And we look at how it gets moldy or not. And you can speak very nicely to the rice, or you can speak really raw, like have very stern energy to the rice, or you can ignore it. And the strange thing is that the one that goes moldy first is always the ignored one. So if there is a connection, whatever connection, if it is good or bad, it always, I don't know, it always works better or something. But then the resonance, so that's also with the sounding forks again, is also used now in a lot of things, and especially in the biodynamic farming, they do a lot of these things. They use it in fermentations, in beers, in food conservation, in ecosystem restoration, in regenerative farming, because it all has to do with microbes. So there is this thing about, I don't know, waves, and it must be something like the gravity and things like that as well. I don't know the details, but for me, it just has to do with microbes. So there's a lot in fermentations, in how all these microbe things work. But then, of course, I'm in soil biology, and so also a lot in microbes. Well, there are, of course, also a lot of these things in healing practices. So in alternative medicine, things like homeopathy works with resonance and with very diluted elements. Well, the blue things I have done, I must say, I'm never very much of a believer in a lot of things, because I also know that a lot of it is placebo or nocebo. It's also about what you believe. If I go to a doctor for a pill, and even if he gives me water, if I believe it's going to heal me, it will work better than if it's not. So that's also a factor. So I'm always very, I've worked too much in science to just do everything. But what we normally do with these things, we make a zero measurement. We look at how the soil is and how the ecosystem is in the beginning. Then we do what we do with the informators and the transformators, and it, of course, it works in time, and it works with what you want it, what it's going to become. It always has a and then we do measurements in between, because you can count, you can see how the ecosystem evolves and how it changes. So that is really just observations, and that is very measured biology. A lot of these things are also in real science. It's also not something of the last period of time or something. There was biodynamic farming has been around since the 1930s. There's really a lot of this around already. And in other cultures, like in China, Japan, as I say, India with the Ayurveda, there's really a lot of overlap also from, yeah, the really scientific things about Ayurveda. For instance, Ayurveda works just with your digestive system and your hormones, and they balance those. And they do it with foods and spices and things like that, and the things that really work. So it's not just that we're meditating like yogis on a rock or something. It's really science for them and how it is done in these cultures. As I say, there's a minister of Ayurveda in India, and also there doctors cannot get to pills until you need a specialist. And like last year, I had cancer, and I, of course, was with my own oncologist. After that, I went to Ayurveda to get my immune system going again, because my own oncologist can't do anything. He says, I don't know anything about food. I don't know about your immune system. It's, yeah, it'll just go right again. Just do what you do. He says the only thing that is really proven science is that you need to take a little bit more vitamin D, because you don't have enough light. Well, I can imagine that. But if that's the only thing, I know a lot more about cultures to say that I can do other things. And I wanted to do other things because I had 5 months of chemo. So everything was broken in my body. So what I know about the Vedic worldview was, of course, that 5,000 years ago, we thought we had a flat earth. So then we had the moon landing, and there was a lot of things in this astrophysics stuff. And we now know that the earth is an ellipse, maybe not as ellipsy as this one, but it's round, but not completely round. It has poles, and it works with difference. That's how nature works. It always works with difference and flows in between. And then 2 years ago, in 2013, when I met Günter Pauli, I already heard about the Superformula, but I didn't understand anything about it. I tried, but I couldn't. So I had never met him in the group of Günter. I worked a lot with them, but just our paths never crossed. I knew from my friends that they met him, but... And then 2 years ago, he reached out to me and he said, do you want to learn? Because I really think we should make it simple and make people understand it. I must confess, it took me 2 years to really see the depth of the difference in normal science. I had done a lot of biomimicry already, so I already knew about engineering being completely different in ecology and biology than in our normal physics. That's the work of Julian Vincent. Later on I can give you another slide about that. But I didn't know about the chemistry part of it. And I also didn't know that we do chemistry like we do physics. We cut and paste molecules instead of doing transformations. And then I started to, well, see all the possibilities of the Superformula. And what is the big difference? The Superformula is this. And for somebody who's a bit into math, it's kind of simple, if you look through it, because a sinus and a cosinus make waves. They are about flows, they make waves. And then you can, because you have the different ends, the different variables, you can give them different numbers. And if you give them whole numbers, then the loops will always close and the loops will always go back to the middle. I will show you it in dynamic. It's dynamic math, and it's one formula for all shapes and growth forms, so the flows of nature. So it's spiraling, and it's how shells make their shapes and how everything is growing. And Newton has, of course, Descartes and Newton have been very, very influential in our sciences, our Western sciences. And only when I started talking to Johan Gillis, I found out how much they don't know yet about biology. So this example that one of you mentioned about the helical heart, it is now found out by a cardiologist, a Spanish cardiologist, and it's all over YouTube as a very serious scientific thing. They always thought that the heart was expanding and contracting, but it's not. It's spiraling, and it has one twist. It just goes twisting and untwisting, and it is a loop. So that's really, and then this cardiologist tells us that for 300 years, they thought it was difference in science. And then I think at this moment in time, there is so many things with all these sciences that are becoming different, that I think something must be there to find out the new clues for how to be an adaptive species to our planet, because that's what I think we should be. It's like our planet will be volatile and uncertain and, I don't know, chaotic and ambiguous. And the thing to do is, of course, to be an adaptive species, because then we can be surviving and thriving on any planet, because we're smart enough to make our cities and our villages just adaptive. So that was my simple idea. Newton worked with the math, how also the Vedic ones did it. So the geometry is the same. We work with circles and we work with a line, and we make different shapes with very sharp angles. And if you now look at how Superformula does it, Superformula starts with a hole. It is a kind of it is a hole with a skin. Look at it like I just explained the skin, the water tension skin between air and water. It's very thin, it's a membrane. And you can blow air in it, and then the outer skin will become an elastic band. So by giving it different variables, you can make either a triangle, you have a 3, or you can make a rectangle, you have a 4, or you can make a flower with 5 petals, and then it's a 5. And so every time it goes back to the middle, and then it gets another growth form. So it is very 3D. So it also means that a seed transforms into, or a flower transforms into a seed, transform into a fruit, transform into the next phase. And that's what Superformula can do, and why it is so special. In biomimicry, we know that everything is in each other. So everything is interconnected and nested into each other. And that's what I always explain. We are a healthy citizen in a healthy society, in a healthy economy, in a healthy planet. It's like you start with the planet and then everything is in the atmosphere. So if you think like that, it kind of becomes better to dance with the systems. And I'm not saying it's not sometimes a bit difficult, because some things cannot be close to each other. It's more about what can be close to each other or not, what should be close to each other. If you, for instance, say, I do not want to emit CO2 and CO2 is just a byproduct, then you say, well, put a greenhouse next to it, and then we grow spirulina on the CO2. It's not so difficult. But you have to make then an area where the CO2 emitter is next to the greenhouse, which is normally what we don't do. So that's what I do in my design things, to see what is close to each other, what can use each other's rest streams, how can we make extra value with all the byproducts that there are, if there are pollution or not, or other things. Well, the super formula works with folds. So you kind of make and of course, how can I explain it? It's like, I don't know if any of you with the math know the Fibonacci strand of all the figures, of all the numbers. It has a certain pattern, and then you go like spiraling, but then in super formula you always go back to the middle. And what was really life-changing for me is the fact that in the Vedic math and all the resonant things, we always made the human connection. And also in Fibonacci, we make the human connection because it is what Leonardo da Vinci used. It is what lots of the other artists use, because it is nice on the human eye. But we know that flies look differently than we do. And dogs smell, they don't look so much, they just smell. So they have different senses. And with super formula, it's now proven for 50,000 species. And then you find out that the strands, well, the Fibonacci is not really, it's rather scarce in nature. And it's not a very abundantly used pattern of numbers. So you can do all kinds of numbers in the formula. Well, here you see all kinds of shapes of nature that have been proven to use super formula, to be made with super formula. There's also water in there on the 4th row. The last row is a very interesting one because it's the diatoms. And the diatoms, I'm really mesmerized by them because they will change a lot. They really transform light into energy with 95% efficiency. Imagine if we could use that in our solar ways, then 95% efficiency, that's kind of innovation that we need in science. It's also the diatoms make 20% of our oxygen in the world. And if we understand them better, and they have a lot to do with resonance, they are microbes, they're microbial algae, and they have lots of different forms and shapes and ways of how they do it. But it's very interesting research that is now used in biomimicry. That's why I like biomimicry to be the #1 innovation method right now, to see how they do it and how we can then also well, innovate. Let me give you a little example of how it works in. This is how Superformula works. It's Reza Ali. He's an artist.
We only still see the PowerPoint. We don't see.
Oh, sorry. Let me see. Stop share. And then I will, thanks for mentioning it. Then I will have a look where it is. Reza Ali is here. Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he is one of the artists using Superformula. And here you see that it's all folding and unfolding and always going back to a middle of a complex system. And colors resonate in there. That's how, for instance, butterfly wings have their colors, which has always been a biomimicry example that excites me, because we can make colors with structure and light reflection without needing toxic inks. And in the last 7 years of my regular career, I was in physical vapor deposition, and we did it with plasmas and vacuums, because that's how we did it in metals. And the interesting thing is then, of course, how do you lock it in? Because we all know how reflection works. But then when you look at a different angle, it gets a different color. So the interesting thing is, how does it work on a butterfly wing? And I can look at it from different sides and it still reflects as the same color. So that is a very interesting thing about resonance again. Is it interesting so far?
Absolutely.
Are you still following me? Are you still following me, or am I still, have I completely lost you?
No, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Oh, good. Yeah, then I'll just try to share a little bit more, yes, because I still want to get your ideas and talk about what you see. Let me see. Well, this is a very interesting one for philosophy. And philosophy at this moment is, of course, very busy as well with consciousness. There is Deleuze. He's a French philosopher. He was a French philosopher. He died. He had the same observations as Johan Gilles had, bamboo. He went for the rhizomes, and Johan Gilles had his Superformula from the shapes of bamboo. But of course, he knows a lot about rhizomes as well. And then Deleuze wrote a book about mathematician Leibniz, and he said the world is interpreted as a body of infinite folds and surfaces that twist and weave. Well, we now know that our heart is a helical heart, and it makes twists and untwists to pump, which is very interesting technically. I still want to tell the people to make a factory like that, where the piping will just pump with the pump, so that you need much less energy. We all put boundaries between a pump and pipes and everything else, and it never works together. But of course, material science can do it. It's not rocket science. We just have to think as an integrated system. But they twist and weave through compressed time and space. Well, they all say now that the fifth dimension is space-time, And that comes from quantum physics. They say space and time is the same thing. How it exactly works, don't ask me. If you want to do the deep science, go to 2 Flemish people. Either Johan Gillis, he will do more talks. He also lectures in Nijmegen often, or in Antwerp. Also Gerard Bodifay, he's an astrophysicist. He also lectures in Maastricht University. I saw several lectures of him. And I know that Johan and he work together and are on the same thing about quantum physics. Because the observer, of course, has to do with where you stand. If you are, it's about speed. If you are in the train, then you look at it differently than when you are on the terrace looking at the train. The speeds are different. And if we then think that on our planet, we are spinning through the universe with 1,670 kilometers per hour, well, Max Verstappen doesn't do it. It's so many G-forces. But how can we do it? Because we're glued to the planet by gravity. And because we are in the train, we are in the planet, spinning with the planet through the universe. So then things are different. And that's what is the mechanical science of speed, velocity, all these beta thingies that I don't completely understand deeply. As I say, I understand some of it, but for the deep knowledge and the really math about it, go to Johan and go to Gerard. The interesting thing is also that he says a lot about motion, dynamics, growth paths, evolution, nomadic. We're all in a process of becoming. And that's, of course, what evolution is. And I think that our problem of this time is not only that we have compacted Earth. We have to decompact the Earth and make it store water again and things like that. It's also about technological lock-ins. We think we know it all, and of course we don't. There's a whole new fast idea coming now that we can still develop. And there's also the commercial lock-ins, because all the companies want to sell what they made and not find something new, because then they have to do the work all over again. So that's a lock-in. And then the governments lock us in with laws. And laws on the one hand are good. Of course, the ESG laws now in Europe will really change a lot, because I've been telling this story for more than 10 years now, and only now I really resonate with some of the people because of the ESG laws. They have to report what they're going to do more than just earn money. Well, that's interesting, because then you get to multiple value creation, and you can of course create it at the same time. Because our biggest problem of our current systems are accumulation. We do things after each other. We pollute it first and then we clean it. Nature always does it at the same time. If you would have boats that clean the water, well, what would the world be like? We don't have boats that clean the water. We only have boats that pollute the water. But if we would, then a lot would be solved. If we would have, I don't know, roads that clean and infiltrate the water, we would have malaria-low cities, because mosquitoes, I always want to design cities from the perspective of a mosquito, because then it will be malaria-low if we make it in such a way that a mosquito doesn't like it and we like it. And what is it that a mosquito doesn't like and we like? It smells. And it is infiltrating water, because mosquitoes lay their eggs in still water. So we have to make sure that next to human settlements in cities, rivers need to be flowing, because then the mosquitoes won't put their eggs in it. And if we infiltrate water, we won't have flood problems. And if the roads then also clean the water, we won't have even the problems of the big microplastics, which are coming into our waters because of the wear of car tires. Well, those are simple things. And the smells are lavender. Mosquitoes don't like lavender. I do. Or citrus smells. We can design whole cities with that. I would love it. I think still it's a kind of a crime that somebody made roses that don't smell. That's really, but maybe that's a female thingy, that I think things should have nice smells, and nice beauty would change a lot in the world. Okay, Superformula. Johan Gilles wrote his book, Inventing the Circle. And there's lots in there about the math as well, but there's also a lot in there about his own journey, about how he discovered it. It was in 2003 that he really, it was around 2000, but then in 2003 he gave it to science. And then the whole journey started of people trying to work with it, architects working with it. Of course, computers helped, because if you want to do complex systems and complex designs, it helps to have computers and to have 3D computer design systems. There's also a Croatian math team. It's Croatian professors, Petar Mladinic and Nikol Radovic. They made a math book for school children, Geometry of Nature. I tried to write my thingy. I must say, at that moment, I didn't understand completely what I understand now, so I will make a new book. But this at least has a lot of the applications in it, because I'm really very fond of giving examples of how it has already been done so people can copy. Yeah. Because I think we should be copiers, and if things have been done already, we should not withhold the recipes from the young people, because they need to have recipes, simple recipes of what has been done. So that's what I do. And then, yeah, this is my new quest, because it is a quest, you know, I don't have all the answers. But what my interest now is in chemistry and alchemy. We all know, and that's also very hardcore science, that in a complex system, emergence is there. So things, it's also a serendipity in our lives. Things emerge in a complex system. We are, of course, also a complex system. But it also means if you have folds in time and space, that they can dis-emerge, they can disappear in the system. And that is interesting with full spectrum light and sound. So that is interesting with resonance. Rexley already told us about her fascination, and mine too, that if you play the sound of a healthy ecosystem in the water, in the corals, then the microbes come running, and they all, and the good ones, they will all lay their eggs, and they love it. And maybe that's also what happens, why we are going to cities. If people have fun, everybody wants to go there. So that's also maybe resonance. We really want to be where the other people are who we feel attracted to. It's a kind of a planetary law of attraction thingy. Nikola Tesla, in his work, already said, if we want to understand the universe, we have to understand energy, frequency, and vibrations. And a lot of people in science are always wondering if he'd gone religious in the end of his life. Well, he didn't. Maybe he didn't have time enough to put it in all of his books, but there is a lot in here, and I know that it's possible because I talk to the hardcore engineer who is at this moment trying to apply it, applying it to a estate in Belgium, the free energy thing. And that is the company Blue Earth Innovations in Maastricht. They are friends of mine. Years ago, we met Frank Colares. He's a biomimicry engineer, and he does pumping systems with 50% less energy because he uses, I don't know, airflow instead of other ways. He's very, very clever in designing systems. They started out working with water systems. And for instance, one thing that always gave me huge insight, and it might be interesting for Rexley in South Africa as well, or in other parts of the world where they don't have a high-tech infrastructure for maintenance, he always designs his systems with relay technology. And if you are a bit handy, you can buy a relay for 50 cents or maybe 10 cents or 5 cents, and you can just repair your own pump instead of needing to reset software. And we all make it into a black box now. But of course, if we make a water pump in Africa and we do not have a maintenance system, we make them dependent on a supplier, which is not fair and makes it expensive. So Frank always is very technical in how he designs these things as independent ways. And Frank and Lily do a lot of work on water. They make water is now in Germany. They do a lot of projects with curcumin. Is normally in the Ayurveda. It is a spice that is very healthy, but normally it only dissolves very well in oil and not in water. But of course, in oil, it's always difficult for our bodies to absorb it, because we know in our bodies absorbing power is more important than quantity. So it's like the calcium example. They all say we should have milk, but if we then drink milk that is normally meant for a cow with 4 stomachs, it's a bit hard for our system to absorb. So the calcium from apples, for instance, is way better absorbed by our system, by our bodies. So it's not about the quantity of calcium, it's about how it's absorbed and how it's transformed in our system. So they do the curcumin thing, they do a lot of other things. And then they also have projects with in vitro culture. That's how I met them also, growing lettuce on water. And if you use their water, then it really grows very strong roots. And it's just lettuce that is in our supermarkets. It's really healthy. It stays fresh very long. There are orchid growers who use it because you don't need chemistry. The only thing is, it is considered magic. So there was a farmer who said, I'm not going to use it. He was very religious. And he said, I'm not going to use it because you do magic. Really, there were things in my water and now it's gone. And it's not transformed into anything else. It's just the biology stays in there and the chemistry, the toxic chemistry disappears. And that is really, how do they do it? So at this moment, there is a project on Schiphol Airport to transform PFAS out of the soil with water and resonance. I know how they do it. They use in their machines, they use the resonance, they put the resonance in the water and they lock it in ostrich eggs. And then they vortex water around it. That's the technology of Victor Schauberger. It's an Austrian. He's in the range of Nikola Tesla, very famous water vortex technologist. And then they use that water. And sometimes they also in permaculture, they also bury eggs in the soil in certain patterns because it works with patterns and we make a scope. But of course, this is not, it is done with science, it's experimental. But they don't know about superformula. They still use the Vedic geometry. And the thing that I'm now trying to do, I will talk to Frank and Lily. I haven't done yet, but I will. I made some appointments, but at this moment, everybody's very busy. Tell them about superformula. And then I would really like to see some really chemistry experiments in science where we say, okay, with this resonance, I think at this moment they use the 528, I assume. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to them about that because they have their recipes and they have the ways how they vortex and things like that. But I think they use the 528. But what would happen if you use the 432? Or what would happen if you use some of the others? There are several stages of these. What would happen if you use the alpha waves of humans, like the 8 to 12 hertz? What would happen if we use a different pattern and we maybe bury also the eggs there in different patterns? What would happen if you make a scope big or smaller, or what is the scope then? So all these things can be, of course, researched in such a very scientific project where we do a zero measurement, because that's what always is. You always have double-blind things in science. So you do a zero measurement. You have another piece of land that you see is kind of the same zero measurement, and you don't do anything there. And then you start with what you do, you start to see how it works. So that would be very interesting for a project. Not sure if it will ever happen. I'm not sure. I don't know where the funding would come from. I'm not sure if Johan has time. I'm just not sure about anything. But I do know that now that I really understand superformula to an extent that I will ever understand it, let me put it like that, there are things that we might be able to do. If you look, for instance, at egg shapes, why do they work? This is the picture of a trout, and a trout has a head like an egg shape, and this is how he goes upstream in the water, because the flows, because of the shape, they go to his head and then they make this fold and then they push it forward. And that's how he can go upstream, which is very interesting to see. Well, this is it. I can't make any more of it. So now I want to have some discussion about, I know it's always much when I try to say things or explain things. But then I think maybe you see things about biomimicry in your own areas, or about ecosystem restoration, or about engineering or chemistry or math. resonance.
Ooh.
The thing that makes the super formula different from the old Vedic math is, apart from that they have different shapes and they don't have to combine them, which is also why in algorithms, for instance, it saves a lot of energy. You just need a few coding lines. So it saves millions of data transfers, which is very interesting because then you don't have such big data centers. But it's also the fact that the old Vedic math was always putting humans in the center. And Johan doesn't do that. He thinks like a bamboo. I'm sorry, he does. And it's really funny because he always says, Desiree, I can't choose. They're all my babies. I can't choose. I can't say this strand is this. When I say sacred geometry, he says, well, what's sacred about it? I can't choose. Why is one thing more sacred than the other? I don't know. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Oh, I think it makes sense what he's saying. Why is one thing more sacred than the other? It's like saying, why is one music better than another? Or how are you going to judge that? How are you going to measure it? I mean, I'm talking about art now as well. I suppose music, art, yes, that's harder to measure maybe, but I mean, I suppose if you had to, you could measure it. But why would it make it better or less better? Maybe we might think it's more effective or less effective, but I mean, effective for what and for whom? Is it more effective for humans, or is it more effective for the trout going upstream? Or
well, if you think from an evolutionary perspective, even applied to music, if the music exists and survives for hundreds of years, I mean, survival is the ultimate measurement of evolutionary success, right?
Yeah, true.
A competition.
but that
So
doesn't make
evolution
it
is
more,
really
doesn't
the
make it more sacred though. It just means that it survived longer.
Yeah, true.
two different paradigms.
Yeah, but when you survive longer, you have the time to have the evolution. So maybe if you
Well, can we define what
last
sacred
long.
means?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Well, one thing I want to say in these shape things is that we all know the swastika now of the Nazis, but it was a sacred symbol in India, but it was the other way around.
Mm.
And they took this sacred symbol and they changed it around and they gave it so much bad energy that in 4 years' time, 5 years' time, it became more powerful than 5,000 years of Vedic positive energy, which is really also where I after I thought about it, I could only agree with Johan, also because I think the future is made not by humans, but by actions and reactions from all species and all complex flow systems, which are also the rivers and the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So they all act and react upon each other.
Well, animals don't notice the swastikas and things that we notice.
No, that's true.
And the trees, you know, the trees pick up the energy, but I don't think that they're going to grow better or worse if you show them a swastika. But if you take away what they need and you destroy everything around them, yes, well then you are taking their energy and you're taking out of the system. So it's not the symbol, it's how we perceive it. I think there's a whole issue here of perception, because the piece of paper with a sign on it means probably nothing. Actually, music has no meaning. People are always surprised as a musician. I tell them music has no meaning. It has the meaning that you give to it.
Yeah.
And you can use it for wonderful things. You can use it to get people marching. You can use it to get people dancing. You can use it to calm people down. But it has no meaning of its own.
Yeah.
But
But
that
it
doesn't mean
has
it
Interesting what
doesn't
you
have
say.
energy.
Sorry.
It has a meaning of its own in the sense that it can do things, or it can be used to do things by us. But on its own, firstly, it carries on. I mean, there are plants that are emitting sounds. I don't know whether they will qualify as music as such, but it is a music-like kind of phenomenon. But unless we give it meaning, and unless we are somehow relating to it, we will have personal sense of meaning. Yes, it will mean something to you or me. We might like Beethoven more than we like Mussorgsky.
Yeah. What would you want to say about it, Joanna? You wanted to say something?
I was just thinking, though, even if it has no meaning, it has energy. So if we're
Yes.
talking in terms of resonance, and that resonance has impact, is the right word I was looking for, then the music has impact, just like the energy given off by the meaning we gave to the swastika will also have impact. My mind went to, it'd be interesting to see what the crops were like around that time. Was there an impact in growth in the years when all of that hate was in the world?
That's
And the
really
resonance given
interesting,
off
yeah.
by thinking.
Yeah, because I think that's again this factor of accumulation. I was always I went to a lot of football games, and you have these drums going on, and they always enhance the adrenaline, which is stupid in my thinking, because if the adrenaline goes too wild, then people get violent. So I always say, go counter. It's like a counter resonance. And then you could calm them down. And if the adrenaline really goes, then you calm them down. You go back to the middle. And that's an interesting thing to think about resonance.
And isn't it that what I was thinking is that if there's music, there are also thoughts, maybe, and thoughts have hearts. And that it's the mixture, or it's how you perceive it, because of the hearts you're producing yourself that are also doing something with the hearts that are coming towards you.
Yeah.
I don't know where
As I say, in the ecosystem restoration project where we do it with resonance, it always works with an intention. So, but it is a bit different than what you see online with things like law of attraction, because of course it is about a piece of land with what the humans do on it. So it can be like, I don't know, it can be your house. And then you make a scope around your area and you say, okay, what do I want to be here? What does it want to become also? And that is very interesting, because you also see, if you go in time with balancing the thing, it changes. So there are things, because it also intentions then can change. So it's also about a company. It also works like that. It is what the Japanese do with the design method. What's it called? There's such a design method of houses and everything.
Feng Shui.
Feng Shui, yeah. And that also works with energy flows, and how in also in the old religions, they say you need to have the door on the east, and then you need to have the other part on the west, and then because then the flow, the sun comes up and a kind of light. In our current cities, that would not be possible, but there's lots of these design principles that are interesting also to see what you want to become together with the land that you're on. And that is like the moon. The moon makes the ebb and the floods, and she pulls more than she pushes. So she really pulls, and then it all
You
yeah,
can
it all in this intention work, we also do that. We make an intention, then we let it go, because it will become what it will become. And there's also no end date. You might say, okay, I give it an in-between date, but there's never an end date. Also not for a company. A company changes.
It's like an organism.
Yeah, it's an organism. Yeah.
And a culture.
Yeah, true.
I keep wondering what will happen if we had that coral reef and we're playing healthy coral reef sounds. Okay. Then my next thought is, if we need, what is the seaweed called that we need all over the place to rehabilitate the ocean? Kelp. So I still want to know what will happen if we play the sounds of healthy kelp forests. Will it help the kelp to grow?
Of course it will. I'm sure
that will be just as easy. Well, maybe not so easy, but I mean, it's quite.
That's what my new Web3 project is about, because we're doing oceans. So yes, we will have all these growth mechanisms with the seaweed farmers and the satellites, and then also see how there's a spectral imaging in there. So there will be also a lot of resonance knowledge, technical resonance knowledge in there of light. Johan is doing now the technical thing about sounds. I think, Rexley, you're also in this project and you know a bit about it. So yeah, there will be all these kind of things as well. And of course, I think water resonates different than air.
I was amazed to see that there's a shrimp. I remember seeing the other day a shrimp who was trying to open a shellfish and made a very sharp cracking sound by, I don't know how, forcing the water out through something. But it actually cracked this shell. And I suppose it's partly because the water transfers the sound so immediately, because it's such a good conductor. But still, it was an extraordinary thing to see. The shrimp has worked this out, or many shrimps over many decades and centuries, obviously, have figured out how to break this hard shell and how to open the shellfish using a cracking sound.
Yeah. And it's also how, that's also very, because now you say that with the sound, I remember seeing blind people getting around cities by making clicking noises, because they hear the reflection of the noise, so they know where to go.
Like echolocation.
Yeah. And of course they have a better hearing because they lose their sight. So also that is a interesting thing, how things, of course, we know we never see the full spectrum and we don't hear the full spectrum because there's a lot there that we don't. And at this moment, everybody, older people, they all laser their eyes just to focus. Well, blurry eyes give us really better focus into past lives and into futures. And I'm really convinced there. I use it, the blurry eye thing.
That you can see what you can't see with your eyes.
Yeah. I don't know how it works, but it's interesting to see that you have the feeling that it works or give you insights. For me, it's always about insights. It's not about this is true or not, but then I get an insight and I think, where does this come from?
That's the
right.
part
I-
of you that sees. That's the part of you that sees without eyes.
Yeah. It's maybe the skin. Maybe that's also an aura. I don't know.
You know, you can use other organs to see with not only your eyes, because my son discovered that you can, in fact, they're helping blind people now by putting a camera into the mouth. In the camera, the tongue becomes like an eye, because it is conveying through from the camera. The tongue then takes the information to the brain, and the brain interprets it. And so they are working on this technology now to help blind people to see through their tongues.
Interesting, huh? They also make these vests. There's also this TED talk about people having vests that they wear. Of course, there are also silly people who all want to implant everything, but I don't feel like doing that. But vests seem like a good idea. And then you can have all these senses combined. Because one interesting thing, it's in a book of Gerard Bodifay. He says, we have two eyes and we have two ears. So one eye sees a point and another eye sees a point. But where are we? We are at the thing that we are not at what we see. We are in between. So we will never really see, because there's always two. So it's always a combination, a flow of things from a standpoint that is not one or the other. It's always somewhere in between, in the full spectrum.
It's a hallucination.
Yeah. Tijn, is it still technical enough for you? Still scientific enough?
To be honest, not really.
Not really. Can you give us
But-
some technical insights about this, please?
I was wondering on the story about the ecosystem restoration oceans with the sounds.
Mm-hmm.
In these cases, you have to be very specific, I would say, which, and I think they're not at that level yet, because indeed it's very new research area. Say, what is the actual effect? Is it, let's say, frequencies that at least at what frequency level? Wait, let me rephrase. So the sound that you emit, the sound of a healthy ecosystem there, from which source does it come? Does it come from the plants? Does it come from the water flow? Does it come from fish or whatever organisms? What frequency levels is it? Is it maybe a total? If we
I think they tape
Yeah.
what I read about it, they tape a complex system. So they tape the full system.
Yeah.
Without
No,
really looking at the different things. So they will be, of course, there will also be things that you don't hear as a human. So there will be like traces of, I don't know, whale sound in there, or because they go over kilometers, they will really reach so far. So there will be traces
indeed.
of
So
all kinds of things in there.
yeah, so in that sense, the question would be is indeed, do they actually record the full spectrum of what is actually happening there? And is it emitted in the right way? But further research, I would say, what aspect of this complete system is it that is making it attractive for organisms? And then also, what is their response? Is it the response of settling, for instance, and from that settling comes a restoration because of the activity that is drawn there? Or is it also that this sort of interaction and this call changes the behavior at location, changes the activity? maybe, you know, changes effectivity of diatom efficiency or of other activity that's happening. So in those regions, for me personally, it's often well, it's very frontier, let's say, so that's difficult. But I was wondering in that sense also, you know, you have this debate on maybe the let's say legitimacy, perhaps, maybe it's not the right word, but let's say legitimacy of pseudoscience. Say in our society, we put a lot of value in scientific truth. What it is, let's leave it at another discussion. But how, let's say, I see a lot of obstacles in getting from the pseudoscience to a relevancy for society of actually accepting it, let's say, and having sort of this.
I think in science, it's the thing why I got interested in this is also because I want quick ecosystem restoration. So that's one thing. I really want, we need this PFAS out of the soil. So for me personally, I don't really care so much if it is proven or not. I really want it done and quickly, because I need to have some results during my lifetime. Otherwise, well, that's my job. You know, I have another 10 years in my work and I just want to do ecosystem restoration. So I'd better do it a bit quickly. So that's why I'm really interested in the ways how we do it the quick way. So that means there's, of course, a lot of deep science in there. I work with John Liu, and there's really a lot of things. But also in Indonesia, I saw how we did it with sediments. We trap sediments that go over a wall, and then immediately everything starts to restore because there are still dormant seeds in the soil. So you don't have to plant. Often planted species are not as strong as grown from seeds. And also in food forests, you see now, we have in Holland, we have very interesting food forest has scientists, and they say that after 8 years, the planted tree has the same height as the one from the seed. And the seeds are much stronger because they've chosen where they will germinate. So that's also something where I think is very interesting. Then, of course, I'm also involved in the weather makers, where they do the whole regeneration of the Sinai Desert with sediments from a lake, so that it will cool the planet quickly. And that they have really done the projections that the weather in large area of Europe and Asia and Africa will calm down. Well, that's interesting enough for me to just observe it. So I know what you're saying, Tijn, and I'm really glad that science is doing the deep work, because what Johan also always says to me, Desiree, you want to go too quickly. Come on. There's still centuries to go. And he says it will all be different anyway. And as long as we adapt, it's okay. He says, but we need to know how it works, and really scientifically. So yes, we dance together. If you want to do the deep science, go to Johan, go to Gerard Bolivet. Really, they are deep scientists, and they will tell you all the technical stuff and everything. But I also want to do the quick ways.
May I add a bit to that? Because Tijn, I think I hear a bit where you're coming from, which is a very strong focus on skeptical thinking, having proven information, scientific thinking, etc. And I think the scientific method is an extremely powerful method that humanity has developed, probably one of the best things, but it's not the only way, because it's extremely powerful, but it also has its limitations. There's certain things it knows it specifically can't do. And there's other ways of thinking that are extremely valuable. like creative thinking is not at all scientific thinking. Yeah. And we could definitely argue that Einstein would have never come to relativity theory without imagination. And imagination has nothing to do with scientific thinking. It's pure creative thinking. And so to make the leap from what is, you need to use it. So there's different ways of thinking. Skeptical thinking, I find an extremely powerful way of thinking to filter idiocies and stupidities from your life. You need filters, and skeptical thinking is a filter way of thinking, and it can in certain contexts and certain situations is very useful. But if you're at an improv session, you don't want skeptical thinking. You want improv thinking then. So we've got all kinds of modes of thinking, and for whatever context or for whatever goal you want to achieve, you need to apply the kind of thinking you want to achieve, your strategy to achieve the goal that you want. And it could be a mix of different kinds of thinking. So what I did at some point is make a list of modes of thinking.
I
And
like
you can
that,
make your own.
Stephen.
You can make your own list. It can be
Yeah.
bullshit thinking. You can, and I made an enormous list of all kinds of modes of thinking, and then you can start selecting what am I going to apply now in this situation? What am I going to apply now? I come myself from. I went through the phases of being very rational, atheistic. Then I became agnostic. Now I'm more like a mystic. I don't really identify with any mode of thinking because I know I'm wrong anyway.
Yeah, I
So I
always
don't
turn
identify.
things around.
You play with it. Just play around with it. Don't be too rigid on it. The scientific method, I love it. I love science. It's extremely powerful. But I've experienced things in my life. Like the scientific method is for me on the complexity of total reality, which is ungraspable anyway. And science itself says it. If you look at Gödel's theorem, it looks at the uncertain principle of Heisenberg, and I don't know these things in detail, but Gödel I've really looked at, not on the mathematical level, but I read Douglas Hofstadter's work on that. I Am a Strange Loop, which explains it very well. It basically is a logical theorem that says there's within any kind of set of axioms, there are things that are true you can't prove. So that's proven scientific. That's proven not on a mathematical level. It's proven on a logical basis, which is a deeper level than mathematics. On a logical basis, it's proven that you can't prove everything. That's just one way to. Well, those are many ways. There's many ways to look at all these things, but still.
I like the way you say it, Stephen. I really like it that you also mention all these different ways of thinking. I really like this interview with Richard Feynman with the BBC. It's on YouTube. And he says the power of imagination is so powerful. But he also explains how he was with a friend and they were comparing how they count in their heads, and they do it differently. And then he came to completely different conclusions. It was so fascinating to see that everybody has a different way how he or she does things. And we never know. We don't even know how we ourselves do things. I always try to turn things around, and then I see it from a completely different angle. And then I think, and then I sleep a night over it. And then after that night's sleep in the morning, I think, it was completely different. And that's really funny.
I've probably abandoned every.
Yeah. Oh, and every.
Yeah, I've probably abandoned every belief system that I've ever adhered to.
Yeah,
So they were all like, yeah, I believe that, but then I noticed, well, that's not complete, and then that was, and I know I'm wrong anyway.
Yeah,
and that's just the cosmic joke of it.
Maybe we should see it as a cosmic joke, yeah. But then also I take these environmental issues very, very seriously. So I try to do the positive thing, but I also see the seriousness of everything. So that's why I think this accumulation of toxicity, Annika, I really want to work further with you on all these toxicity things, because it's really not healthy.
No.
Let's make a little round and see what you got out of this session. Just a few lines, please. Who starts?
I would like to start because I have to help my daughter with her homework.
Mm-hmm.
She's desperately waiting. Biology, I like that. I think it's very inspiring because I really like going behind the edges of the things that are already known. So look further and see, okay, maybe this work, maybe this will work, and try to be as open as possible for all that we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really inspiring me to do some more research on it as well, and see and look things up and try to sort of see how far I get with understanding it. Yeah. What the triggers for me, and also as a psychotherapist, maybe is with the resonance and attention. And what it also triggered was a question like, what is it that really works in it? And is it the hurt, maybe? Or is it the attention? That's something that came up in me. Because I believe the earth herself is a living organism. I think, for instance, also the trees sort of know. So
in their own way, they have, they
yeah,
have a skin as well. They will have perception in some way.
yeah.
I don't know. No,
Some
nobody
wisdom as
really
well.
knows yet. Yeah.
Maybe we watched, but so it triggers that in me, because that's the thing that I'm sort of lately more is coming in on my path. So it's very incomplete, but that's how it resonates with me. And I think for the toxicology, I think it's interesting to talk about that further. And I only just started learning from it, so it's also being on a path. And the PFAS is really a big problem. I agree.
Yeah.
So if we can have a quick fix for it, I'm certainly in for it. And the biomimicry is also very nice. Yeah, I think it was inspiring.
Who else? Who wants to say something at the end of this session?
I'll say something. I really like the practical way you're working on actual projects as you bring together such interdisciplinary people from softer sciences and what you call, I don't really think pseudoscience is pseudoscience. It's just science we don't understand yet. But
that's what I think as well. Yeah.
And I really, obviously, for people like Johan, I really felt for a long time that the key, when you start taking philosophy and combine it with advanced mathematics, you pretty much get the answer to every question. And I kind of, modern day philosophers are kind of making a resurgence, and it makes it easier for people who aren't very religious or spiritual to look at these deeper subjects, because philosophy has a way of interacting with the harder science in ways that regular society might feel is socially acceptable. So I've been researching a lot of these subjects for a long time, but what I find really very inspiring, like I say in my case, is not waiting to have all the answers, that you're already out there doing ecosystem restoration using these things now, that you're not waiting until all of the information is in terms of how everything is working to get going on these projects. That's very encouraging, because that means that despite the way the world looks, there's all sorts of projects behind the scenes that where things are a lot more positive than you realize. And then you're establishing these little fractals of communities all around the world that will build on each other like a spiral. You know, the community itself, you can get one project and then an entire community can build around that to branch off from there. And so in the world I'm in, there's a lot of, attempts to regulate things too quickly, and we don't understand things well enough. So it actually will prevent things like you're trying to do from happening more often. I really like to see this balanced approach with practical grounds up work and sort of the efforts from on the policy side, however well intentioned, can actually get in the way of creativity when it becomes limiting for some of these things to happen, depending on what policies get formed. So, and also just when it comes to frequency, it's also a question of these new tools. We have more tools to measure these things, and it sounds like some of the tools are kind of expensive. Like when you start looking at atoms, for example, not the average ecosystem restoration person might not have X-ray crystallography in their back room. So it'd be nice to see innovation on the tool side to make these things more accessible and more affordable, so people can start looking at things like the connection between shape, atoms, what something looks like on the atomic level, like what's actually happening to water on the atomic level. Same thing for carbon. Not all carbon is the same. So carbon coming off from an oil plant versus carbon that may be going into, we look at it all as the same, but it's not the same, just like water's not the same. And once we have tools to measure these things easier, more affordably, get them into more people's hands, so these projects can really take off more with citizen scientists around the world. So that's one of the areas I'm really excited about. And it sounds like you're interacting with a lot of these people now. So I'm very excited to learn.
Yeah, I take this with me because I did see what it did with the, I worked on a healthy building project, and we were really looking with the University of Maastricht to what it does, CO2 in your body. So it seemed that when you are in a closed off building and there's no good ventilation or anything, and then we had this little tool, the Blue Innovation Center made it, and you could just measure it, and it went red when you had too much CO2 in the meeting room. And then they really measured it in the brains, and it was like they were drunk making their decisions. It was done with chess people, chess players even, and they really couldn't play chess any longer when they were, and it was like normal levels. It's normal levels in schools and everything. And then I think that really got me on the quest for healthy buildings, or I think it's stupid. We spend 90% of our time indoors, and the indoor air quality is so bad that it's mostly 2 to 5 times worse than the outdoor air. And then things like that. But I take it with me because it is the tools indeed that make it visible. And I also hope that things like AR on phones and everything make it easier to make things measurable and to get it closer to people.
Very exciting. Thank you so much for organizing this. It's really fascinating and interesting.
Anybody else?
For me, it was I'm very interested in evolutionary psychology and sociology and concepts like tragedy of the commons and all these dynamics, incentive systems that scale up from individual to societal level. I'm now wondering, in terms of application of biomimicry to these kind of sociological phenomena, what can we learn from nature? And I was just coming to the idea, but we are the pioneering species in stories, like, because most of our reality is stories. We live in an extremely symbolic world, whereas other animals, I think someone mentioned that. I think Rexley mentioned that. Animals don't, I mean, they don't care about swastikas, they would just walk over it or whatever. But we live in an extremely symbolic world. So we're actually this pioneering species in this whole symbolic universe. And then I wonder, there's only one book that I've read over on something similar. It's called Teaming. It's about biomimicry applied to organization design, so a bit more narrow, but actually quite interesting, looking at superorganisms like ant colonies and so on, and beehives and mycelium networks. How can we apply that to our current human superorganism civilization? But still, yes, on the game level, on the systems level, there's similarities, but they don't have all these imaginary story worlds. And we are the first species to really have that at that scale. I mean, there may be some elephants having some kind of symbolic systems here and there, and I mean, at limited scale, there's a bit of it, but at the scale, we are pioneering on that. So I'm wondering what biomimicry could do on that level, on like, what can we learn from nature, from the past 4 billion years, that we can apply to our story systems? Because if we look at it, I mean, there's many problems, there's many challenges in the world. But one of the challenges is agreeing on belief systems, or what we're going to focus on. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm just developing this as I'm speaking. So
yes, it's very interesting that you say this. Yeah, because I think, yes, we do everything on stories, and we are maybe the only species that is not putting its only species first. Well, we do. We made human central, but then we fight each other because we fight between races and everything. But by now, we are rational people. We know that we all came from Africa. So we all have genes of Africa in us. So we all have black skins. And still, there is this idea of you recognize someone and that is resonance. It is recognizing someone. And that's why, I don't know, men maybe understanding men better, or women, or it must be maybe skin color, or maybe age, or maybe all these things matter. And then you kind of group together or something. I don't know. But I think it is very interesting to see what it could do with story things. Yeah. I'll see what I can develop on that as well. Yeah.
Maybe to respond on that, I think also looking at it personally a bit, this aspect of this symbolic and storytelling aspect of human nature, I think that's also something that, and especially let's say the worldviews that we utilize nowadays in the actions that we do very often, and the way that they let's say the way they influence the design of our systems and our operation, that has somewhat, for me, it feels like that has disconnected from, let's say, a natural perspective. And so biomimicry is in that sense for me also an inspiration to sort of convert back a little bit and try to connect these or change these worldviews and these stories a little bit more backwards to the natural stories, and actually, and in doing so, trying to connect better to the rest of the world that is not so symbolic in that sense. So I wouldn't say maybe that let's say that that biomimicry would be an inspiration on how to develop better let's say, how to pioneer better as humans in that aspect of us, because as you say, as humans being a pioneering species, that's the best place to learn from, sort of the mentor himself. But for me, it would be more like not pioneering further, but also looking backwards a little bit more and trying to reconnect in that sense. But that's actually comes up to quite an existential question in that sense, which would be the better path forwards, maybe.
Yeah. I also don't have all the answers to all of this. I must say my latest idea is that I want to write science fiction, just to tell how to give hope and perspective, and then tell how we did it. So it might be a way to get recipes out there, very generalized recipes, because of course a lot of things need to be adapted to local ecosystems and local cultures. But it might be a way to say, okay, it's 2030 and we did it on the brink. We just did it. The global goals, they were all met, but how did we do it? And then you can just give the recipes. So that's what I try to do now in my storytelling. I think the sign of the times is, on the one hand, we know it's soil and water, but the sign of the time is space and Mars. We were not even interested in the moon after we saw it and we were there, and then afterwards we just left it or something, and then it became Mars. And that's also something, I don't know, very, for me it's really very male. If I look at Elon Musk and Zuckerberg now thinking about doing a cage fight about who is, I really think, oh, how can you think about things like that while the world is burning? It's so strange to me, but I don't know. I think it is a sign of the time, space. And so I also try to hook into the sign of the times, because then I get a bigger, I don't know, bigger relevance maybe.
I would say in that one, obviously I don't know, but I can also imagine that let's say the perspective from an Elon Musk and a Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and whoever on space is very, for them themselves, the perspective on that journey is very different from what, let's say, the common knowledge about that journey is. And how it's how the story is, let's say, lives in the global community. Of course, I guess they have a very different perspective than what you see in, let's say, the general media about it. So that, yeah, I would be curious to learn a bit more on what that perspective is.
I'm an Elon Musk fan. I see how nerdy he is and how socially unadapted. So yes, but I'm a fan in some way of his ways of thinking. He's really a minimalist. I really like his ways of, I don't know, but yeah. I'm also an observer, I must confess. So I always try to observe and then not make it too big on the liking or not liking or, yeah, judging.
Maybe as a last sort of what I got from this session is, it was really nice to see that the people in this call were from very, very different backgrounds, and they all have a sort of a common demeanor as a search for different perspectives, because they see that sort of the limited range of perspectives that are around them are not suitable to answer the questions that they are that are being raised in their heads. So I thought that was quite inspiring to see. Yeah, and that in combination with the different modes of thinking, let's say, an extra motivation to keep doing these sort of things.
Okay.
And
I'll try to do them every month now. I will have every Monday. I will have a lab. It depends a little on the on what people want to do. I try to find topics that people really want to learn about. Maybe go deeper into Superformula. Maybe go deeper into other stuff. Or if you have requests, just put them to me, and then I'll see if I can do it. And then every first Monday of the month, I will try to keep it more general and build on on the former ones, so that we can also see what has been done in our different areas, maybe with it, because that's for me also interesting to see how people adapted to their local ecosystems and local cultures, and yeah, how it works and what works or not works, or yeah.
for
Is
me
it like a
personally,
plan? Does it sound like a good plan to do it like this?
well, for me personally, the remark was mostly also about just for me, myself, and my surroundings to just keep asking and searching for different perspectives. Doesn't necessarily have to be here, but also welcome.
No, there are many of these things, of course.
As an addition, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, did you like it?
I did like it. So my brain's gone boom as per usual.
I have that effect on people. I'm sorry.
But I'm finally understanding the scope, which I wasn't getting from the post. So thank you. I finally understand the scope. And I think what I'm doing in my head is a couple of things. One, I'm applying resonance and superformula to systems theory, and seeing how that multiplies across various types of systems that we are and are in, and how it could possibly be used, thinking about that. And also seeing resonance as an energy. That's the connection I've made in my mind. And I'm not quite sure where that's going yet.
No.
But
I must say what is
it's
very
almost
interesting
how does the
then,
energy
yeah. What's also very interesting then is to look at the work of Julian Vincent and think, because it's always words that we use, energy just might be information, because there are all these formulas all the time around us, doing gravity and things and this and that and microbes, and 20% of the oxygen is just we're breathing in diatoms, and it's all around there. And then maybe energy is information. Think about it. I will go on to this track further.
Okay. I'm interested. You've got me hooked. Yeah, so again, that's the connection for me back to the kind of spiritual, I suppose, but the super formula within systems is and I think it was you, Stephen, saying how we might apply that to organizations. So I'm going to look at that biomimicry in organizations as well, but also thinking how we might use the super formula and the maybe even the shapes and the patterns as to how we organize people. Yeah, there's lots of stuff going on in my head, but no, very interested.
And there's also a lot of work done there on biomimicry and organizations. Yeah,
I'm gonna have a look.
Yeah,
thank you.
Eloise,
I will
what
take a
about
look
you?
at that one. Thank you.
Yes, for me, it's several things. You said that when you don't do the what was it, the hertz, that when it's ignored in the soil, that there doesn't happen so much. So for me, it's interesting that when something is ignored, that is the yeah, yeah. And also our thinking and just using words, it's a way of the definition, disconnection, and I'm trying to find and everybody says, okay, we have to put our things in the scientific truth, and that's also definition, and I'm trying to put it in the resonance and the superformula where it has a place, because I think our way of disconnecting, and we did it for several ages. I think it has a role too, and so that's why and when you say, okay, it's always getting into the middle, and okay, maybe, but also in nature you also have this buitensluiten. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Because
of course.
when you give birth, it's also when your organs are making juices, it's in way. So in a way, I would love to look at all these ages where we're getting better and better and better in thinking. I want to give it a role or something and understand this also in this resonance. And maybe it's for me now that it's always getting back. Yeah, but yeah, I'm curious, but yeah. So
I'm really curious how you will give it a visual. Because I'm
but
really
do you
curious.
see this? Because do you see this disconnection, excluding? Do you see?
Of
Does
course,
it has
nature
a
has that
place
too.
for
The only
you
thing
in
is,
this?
yeah. The thing is that in superformula thinking, everything is and.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you exclude yourself or if it's not excluded or if it's molecules or whatever. We think too linearly. We think so all the time everything goes in pixels, let me put it like that, and comes back together again, because also when we die we will be molecules again, and we will still be in the system. So it is not if you really look at it like that, then everything is always coming back. And then if I really love Lynn Margulis. She's a
I know her.
Yeah, that documentary was really very interesting.
Oh, you saw a documentary of her?
Symbiotic Earth. It's about her life, and she's really marvelous. But
yeah,
she is
more
putting
with the organism symbolic of now symbiotic. She has more the story of the symbiotic thing.
No, she's really into bacteria. She was with James Lovelock, and he was about the Gaia theory.
Yeah.
She was the microbes, and together they made the Gaia theory. So they always say James Lovelock, but it was always them together. But she made this evolution theory that we all stem from microbes, because it was 3.8 billion years the first life on Earth. And I really think that all the water on the planet, for instance, all these drops and molecules and whatever, they have been always here and just transformed. Or so I don't know about exclusion. I think all these terms are a bit a bit human.
For me, it's
Red
the
human.
thinking.
Yeah.
In a way, we put things in squares where
We
it's
want to have
think.
them in boxes and to have them logically arranged. Yeah.
But in a way, but creativity, that's my thing, is also always having chaos, and then creativity comes, and then you're ordering, and then you put it in a box, and then so in a way there it's.
Well, that is a very interesting one, because that is how crystals do it. So
Okay.
they always crystallize, and then you see, look at snowflakes. They are formed by their circumstances, and then they always crystallize, and the next and the next and the next. So that is also how things grow.
Yeah.
That's
But
an
for
interesting
me,
thing
for
to
me,
see.
I would love to not throw all our development away.
Oh, we don't.
Say, because
we cannot
I think,
even.
Yeah, but sometimes it feels like, oh, what we did is not okay.
No.
But I would
No.
love to combine it.
Yeah, I must say, I always use what is already there.
Yeah.
That's what I create with. I always use the culture and the ecosystem and the climate zone. And I always think it's and, because the past always comes back in other forms.
Yes, I believe.
So
Yeah.
everything had a function. At some point in my learning, I hated Descartes. And I read about how he was so mesmerized by clocks and he was so convinced that dogs had no soul, that he cut the dog of his wife open while it was still alive, and then said, yeah, look, it's screeching just like a clock. And then I think, I hated this guy, but I know what he brought, and I know what Newton brought. And we can never go back to nature, because that's also Julian Vincent. Nature has only like 5 elements or something, carbon and helium even. Helium doesn't even, it's a very big element, a very abundant element. We don't use it apart from maybe getting a bit of a high or a strange voice. But so it's, nature always uses structure, and we use for everything a different material. And it doesn't matter. It's not like it matters. We have to combine it by now, because we know that we do it differently. And then we have to be clever, because in biomimicry, we never say we copy exactly nature. We either go from, we understand biology and we translate it to a human solution for something, or we challenge biology. And people like Neri Oxman, for instance, does it wonderfully. And then we look at the negative effects. And if we make the negative effects as small as possible, and we keep monitoring so that we have unexpected effects, we can solve them, then yeah, we have to by now, because we don't do it like nature does it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So that's my perspective, but also Janine Banyuas and the whole crew of biomimicry. They never say just do nature, or it's not even about bio-based. There's a lot of bio-based in there, but it's not even about bio-based.
I think we're what you're saying, we're not doing it like nature. I think it's actually, we are exploring new possibilities of nature.
Yes.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So that's why
I mean, we are operating within the
and that's evolution as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
yes.
even animals do that. They find different tools and they do different things, and then they open the milk bottles, and then they remember that their ancestors did it, and then they think we can do it as well. And so all these things are very interesting.
I think Stuart Kaufman wrote on this in one, I think it's Reinventing the Sacred. But but I think he wrote something on this topic, and I don't remember. Sorry.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. There's so much to know, and there's so much all of us bring to these conversations. I want to thank you very much for bringing all of this to the conversation. I will stop the recording now.